So could you let everyone know just what is like the quick and dirty definition of UXR and maybe some examples about how like what it is in industry?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, anything that has a screen, like your phone or the computer, has an interface or some design where all the actions, like what you're supposed to click on to get in there, how you're supposed to buy something online, all of that is considered the user experience of that. If you're trying to choose a bank, like it matters how the experience of it looks. Everything from your perception of that company just by looking at their design to what it's actually like for you to try to accomplish something on that site. And people don't have very much patience. If a
Yeah.
design is not good, then they're like, well, that's a bad company.
Hey folks, thanks for tuning into the Grad School Sucks podcast, the show for grad students who want to survive grad school and thrive in their career afterwards. I'm your host, Matt Carlson, and today I'm talking with Dr. Gregg Murray. Gregg is a user experience researcher who was formerly a tenured English professor. Gregg joins the podcast to talk about how he discovered user experience research, also called UXR, why academics are a perfect fit for the UXR space, and how grad students can prepare themselves to enter the industry job market. This is a great episode for folks who are interested in the UXR space, as well as for anyone who wants to hear about how to make the leap from academia to industry. Be sure to rate and review the podcast if you like today's episode, and without further ado, let's get to the interview. All right, Gregg. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I've had the opportunity to talk with you twice before, and both were great conversations that I loved, and so I'm excited to be able to share you and your story with the listeners today. So, first things first, could you just introduce yourself briefly to everyone listening?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Gregg Murray, and I am now a UX researcher.
Yeah, yeah, and I've gotten really fascinated by the UX research world recently. Um, Originally from Savannah Young, who was our mutual contact, or she shared some content of yours, and she was actually on the podcast. I don't remember which episode. I think it was episode 4 or 5, something like that. But so let's start from the beginning. You've had a really interesting journey, but let's go back. So why did you originally get into academia? And I guess more specifically, why did you go to grad school?
Yeah. Um, and I think there are a lot of different reasons that, I made that choice. I remember in my undergrad, I was just really excited about ideas and found myself wanting to be immersed in that. I liked the idea of inspiring others. And I actually had really wanted to be a professor since I was little
Hmm.
because I just had this vision of a life where that was the focus, was like following my heart and following my curiosity and getting to share that with others and go on that journey together and constantly be learning new things. And yeah, I think I was idealistic in that. Um, compared, I guess, the hindsight that I have, I feel like I look at myself then and say, that was really idealistic. I'm not sure I had a very well sketched out vision of what that was going to look like. But that I think was the basis for it. And I tried to get an industry job right out of school without really preparing for anything
Hmm.
in industry. So I was able, because I was had high achievement in college, I was able to get interviews with consulting firms, but I didn't know anything about what they did, and I didn't prepare. So, um, and I think that helped me to want to double down and pursue my passion. Um, this was 2002, and the advice that I got then was don't go. So that was 20 years ago. Or if you go, just know what you want and what you're willing to do to get it. And yeah, I ended up getting a teaching position and spent a few years doing that while I prepared grad school applications. And then I went to get my PhD in 2006.
And what was your area of study that you went into?
Yeah, so I was doing English literature, and I actually had minored or majored in that as well as philosophy in undergrad. But I was looking for a unique angle, of course, because preparing for grad school, I was like, I like books. I want to study something and then figure it out. But
Yeah.
you have to demonstrate that you already can do it. So I gravitated toward um, play and playing games, playfulness, and it had a really sociological side to it. So I was interested in literary games as like a sociological phenomenon, I guess. And I did end up studying that. I I think there are some reasons that I ended up staying with that, um, because I think I found out after a few years that if I didn't choose an expedient path to my degree, that I was not going to stay because I was, unhappy with some aspects of the journey.
Yeah. Do you mind sharing what aspects of the academic journey you were unhappy with?
Yeah. So I when I got the advice that I shouldn't go because there weren't any jobs, and now it's way worse. But
Yeah.
when I got that advice because there weren't any jobs, I thought, well, and this was the advice that I felt like I had internalized as a kid was, well, if you go into something, as long as you work very, very hard and you pursue your dreams with a lot of vigor and discipline and everything, then you'll be fine, even if it's not the best choice, even if it's something that, doesn't have a lot of good outcomes, that I'll be able to get one of those good outcomes and it will be fine. So I think that I ended up really trying to focus on what I could what I could do and get as many accolades and opportunities as I could, having chosen to do that path and somewhat like stubbornly chosen that path.
Yeah. And so you went to get your PhD in English and literature, and then what was the process like of, you're nearing the end of your PhD, you're looking at jobs. I don't know if you have postdocs in that field, but maybe you're looking at like postdocs or teaching positions or that kind of a thing. Like, what was the end part of your grad school career like?
Yeah, it was actually really interesting, and I want to be careful how much I disclose about the a precise situation. But my advisor had some health concerns while I was dissertating. I and there was not very much communication during that period, and that meant, in addition to the rest of my committee and their level of engagement, I was not really getting very much feedback. And I wanted to get done. So I just kept writing. And, like 250 pages later, it was like, okay, this is what I've got and I need to get out of here.
Yeah.
And fortunately, they weren't like, you need to redo this whole thing. This doesn't work. And I think I lucked out in that sense, that because I did see some of my cohort, based on who their advisor was, being told, oh, well, you need to read all the books that I like, or
Mm,
before you
yeah.
take on your project, or you need to study this particular thing that I'm interested in, and you need to do this in order to train yourself for the field. And I think I was very fortunate in that the direction I received um, was like, what do you, well, it deferred to what I perceived I needed. So I felt like I was asked, are you trying to get a job? Are you trying to get out of here? Are you trying to do a top shelf dissertation? Like, what are your goals here? And at that point in my life, I was already like, I need to do this and get out of here.
Mm,
So that, I think it was nice that that was, we were able to have that.
yeah.
But I want to back up for a second too, because I didn't start with that attitude.
Oh, yeah.
Um, I started with wanting to, you know, be the most amazing researcher and give myself the greatest opportunities to be a professor and to get the job that I wanted. So after 1 year, um, I was like, I'm going to reapply to the grad schools that I think can do that for me.
Ah,
And I had an unsuccessful round of reapplying. And that actually, I think, was a really tough thing on a number of different levels. One, it indicated concern and dissatisfaction. It communicated dissatisfaction to the people that I asked to write for me,
yeah.
which didn't go over very well. But it also was an example of a failed enterprise on my
Yeah.
part. Like something that I worked really hard to try to do that didn't pan out. And I thought, this is even worse than I thought.
Hmm.
Because what I was seeing was you had to go to certain schools to get a job. And
Right.
I wasn't able to go to one of those schools. So it was like, it was kind of giving me an indication that my plan was maybe not as solid as I thought it was.
Yeah. Interesting. So, so then how did you find the academic job market to be?
Well, I was fortunate. In some ways, I skirted the academic job market um, by looking for a position while I was writing my dissertation. And I
Hmm.
found a school, Georgia Perimeter College, which was not conducting a nationwide search. They,
Hmm.
I think their strategic plan was not very good, but they were only advertising their jobs on kind of Georgia job boards, I guess. Like
Interesting.
you couldn't find it in the Chronicle of Higher Ed, which
Yeah.
to me is just like, huh? like, um, and I was looking for adjunct work,
Hmm.
but I thought, you know, so that I could pay the bills while I dissertated. And I applied for a tenure track position and was, to my surprise, was invited to interview.
Yeah.
Um, but it's funny too. This story is, I think, revealing in some ways. It was. It actually turned out to be hard for me to accept the position, and this story should indicate just how deep some of these problems are in academia. I got a phone call from the VP of Academic Affairs at this school offering me a job, and then he said, when did you get your PhD? And I said, oh, I'm defending in 3 weeks. And he said, "Oh, you don't have it yet?"
Hmm.
And I said, "Oh no, I just, but I have my date set and I'm going to go do that." And he's like, "Oh, I don't actually, we can't offer you the position."
Hmm.
And I was like, well, "Why the hell not?" Like, oh, because candidates for it have to have their degree in hand to be considered. And I'm like, what kind of a school is this?
Yeah.
And what kind of a policy is that? Um, Welcome to Georgia, is what I would
Hmm.
say. Um, Georgia's entire education system is just filled with insane difficulties like this,
Yeah.
and like what feel like deliberate hurdles to make the liberal academy frustrated. And,
Yeah.
and you know what I mean. I know that sounds like a pretty dark thing to say, but my time in the university system of Georgia, there was just absurdities.
Yeah. So did you ended up getting that job?
So what I did, thanks for getting me back on track. I ended up um, saying, "Hold on, I'm going to see." Um, what was the problem? Turned out to be that you had to have at least a master's in hand.
Hmm.
But I went into a PhD program directly from undergrad.
Sure.
So I called the University of Minnesota and I said, "I need a master's because I'm not able to be offered a job. Can you give me a master's?" And I
Hmm.
think the dean ended up, you know, taking that on and saying, "Okay, well, this affects our job, you know, acquisition ratio or whatever, and we need to get that up." That was probably part of his logic, but also he probably had some sympathy for me. And he went down the hall and got that signed and told them to award it to me. So I was able to send that over. And this guy, the VP, was just such a, I won't name his name, but um, he wasn't willing to accept a fax with it. He needed a paper
Wow.
copy.
Okay.
Yeah. And like I
Man.
said, I mean, this should have been an indication that I should cut my losses.
Yeah.
Um, but but I don't think that it was all bad. I ended up getting a lot out of my time at at Perimeter. Perimeter ended up merging with Georgia State
Hmm.
University, which opened up some additional opportunities for me from the perspective of just opportunities within the university. But ultimately, yeah, it's that was a really the writing to me was probably on the wall, and I just wasn't reading it.
Yeah. So when did you know that you wanted to leave academia for industry?
So I ended up getting tenure. I spent 10 years in that position. Um, I took on an internal role, an appointment with the Honors College as part of it, and there were some very positive things about that. I really enjoyed teaching. I got involved with some amazing colleagues and made really good friendships. But it still started to feel to me like um, there were problems. My school was mired in a scandal in 2011, my second year there. I think I've got that timeline right. And that was, I think, embarrassing to the institution. There was the merger, which created confusion, but also some hope that some things might change for the better. And so there were periods where I, I was waiting for things to get better because it was so hard to get a position in the first place. And I thought, well, if things get better here, then I'll have what I want, which is tenure at at a university. Like that ended up being satisfying the goal that I had. So I thought, well, let's see if that happens. And in the meantime, I really committed myself to having a strong tenure file and doing things that I thought were really valuable to, you know, to my record, but also to, the community I was a part of. But I never really lost that. Like, these are my goals. This is what I'm trying to accomplish. And there was my salary was frozen for 7 years by the university system of Georgia. Like, they didn't give us a raise for cost of living raise for 7 years. So I was like making
Wow.
less money, you know.
Right.
And the raises were so small that when I got promoted to associate professor, um, I, for all intents and purposes, made less money than I had the year before because we didn't get
Wow.
a cost of living raise and the raise wasn't very big. So I was doing things on the side, trying to get a strong tutoring practice going, um, because I felt like I needed more income in order to live the way that I wanted to live. Um, and, I had hoped that I would be able to have a family as well. And I just didn't see that being, really making enough money to do that. And so um, I was sad about that. And I was trying to figure out, well, how do I carve out the life that I want in this
Right.
space? I was fulfilled on the level of connecting to my community. I was fulfilled in making a difference. I was fulfilled in having colleagues that I could talk about ideas with. And I wasn't really killing it in publishing the way that I wanted to,
Hmm.
but I was doing enough so that I could get my promotions that I wanted.
Right.
But then there was I think the salary was the biggest piece, that I just didn't feel like I could make it work with that. But then on the flip side, I couldn't figure out what else I would do. I felt
Right.
so pot committed. I mean, I had gotten a humanities undergraduate degree. I had pursued that and done a PhD in English literature. It was interdisciplinary, but it wasn't um, it wasn't something that required quantitative research. Like it wasn't there wasn't an applied version of the degree that I did. So I thought, well, as a researcher moving into industry, I wouldn't know how that would be applied anyway.
Yeah.
So I just kind of, I mean, to be candid, I think I just kind of personally spiraled a bit, for a few years until I was like, um, I've got to make a change and I've got to figure out what that's going to be, what that's going to look
Yeah.
like.
Yeah. And so was UXR your next step? And if
Yeah.
so, how did you find out about it?
Yeah. UXR just came on my radar through a friend of mine who had done the UX Design Immersive boot camp at General Assembly, and then had landed a a really good job. And this person I was friends with, but we didn't hang out regularly. And he had done graduate work and gotten a PhD, um, and then was on the market for years and was adjuncting, was in that wheel. And I could tell just, from our social media friendship, that that was not satisfying to him. And then I remember we actually did end up hanging out at an event one time together, and I was like, things seem really good with you. Like, what's new? Oh yeah, I got this job and stuff. And I wanted to know more about it. So we went out to dinner and we talked about it. And I was like, okay, this feels really interesting. And he was like, oh, I got the bill. I make twice as much money as you. So
Wow.
like, so I
Yeah,
got it. And this friend was not a show off, but this was
sure.
just not really what we did as professors or anything. We would just, you
Right,
know, I was always very conscious so that I could make sure that I was able to meet my own budget. But he's just like,
right.
it doesn't matter. I make plenty of money for that. And I was like,
Yeah.
what do you do again? Like, and but that conversation was also significant, not just for that part of it, but because he kind of took me through and said, okay, so what I do, the skills that you have are very, very valuable in this space.
Hmm.
Um, and they actually are not something that everybody just has.
Yeah.
Um,
I
even
feel like
though
most grad
yeah,
students should rewind that last 10 seconds.
I, um, it was emotionally, it affected me emotionally in the moment
Yeah,
when he said that, because I had come to believe that I had wasted my time.
right.
When it comes to uh, acquiring valuable skills while I had the chance, while I was paying
Hmm.
all this money. Now, in grad school, I did get, funding for my program, but I still had to pay off my undergraduate education,
Right.
which was a very expensive one. So I was thinking, when I looked at just the conversion there, or the investment, so to speak, like how much have I put into this, and what do I have that I can then translate into what I need, in in order to feel like I'm thriving in my career.
Yeah. So So when did you so you went to this dinner, you learned about this friend's job in UXR and what it was like and how the research skills that many grad students learn are really quite applicable and valuable in this space. And people who don't go into a research oriented profession like many PhD students do basically don't get these skills. So you learn all of this, and when do you
Right.
decide to actually start applying to jobs?
Yeah. So I decided, because I didn't have much of a tech background, um, I thought, here's what I can do. I can do the boot camp, and that'll get me all the basics, and then I will learn how I can leverage the skill set that I have to get my job. I probably didn't need the boot camp, to be honest with you.
Right.
Um, but at that point in my life, I was also teaching online. This was the beginning of the pandemic. And
Mm.
so I thought, but I can do the boot camp at the same time as I'm teaching these courses. I didn't have a heavy load that summer. Um, and so I went ahead and took that at the same time. And it was a lot of work, but only because I was doing both things. Um,
Yeah.
but I skilled up, and what I found was, especially in formulating my resume, getting it to communicate to companies that I had done relevant things, that really required a change in emphasis on what I had done and a change in the language that I used to express it.
Hmm.
So I had done all the right things. Like I had managed projects, or like I had managed 1,000 projects. They were research
Yeah.
projects, right? Yeah, it was students like trying to write about what on a position paper or something, but that was a project that required scoping the project and determining exactly what they needed to cover in the project. And scoping is very, very important in UXR, in product design generally, probably in
Yeah.
business generally. You have to figure out what you're going to take on so that you can put a good plan together and execute that plan. And that's really what it's all about. And it's not hard to determine what needs to be done. It's not
Right.
like what I found, and this may sound cavalier or something, but like it's not as hard as what we do in graduate school. Like writing and making a unique contribution to a field is hard. Um, Identifying and doing a literature review and then feeling like you have the intellectual ability and discipline to add something to that,
Mm-hmm.
to even determine what you would add, is hard.
Yeah.
In this space, I'm talking to 6 people and I'm asking what they think of a design, and like trying to understand whether they're frustrated or not, and pursuing that so that I can design the thing better. That's
Yeah.
easy. I mean, that's just not as hard as trying to identify a unique lens for understanding, you know, the lachrymose nature of modernist poetry in a particular neighborhood in the United States. Like, I mean, something incredibly specific,
Hmm.
that you're trying to say something about, that requires, um, extreme devotion and concentration. Um, and I'm not saying that you can't work hard in product design, but like the skills required to do the dissertation work,
Yeah.
you've got it. If you can do that, you're fine. Right.
Yeah. That makes sense. So I I've got a couple things bubbling in my mind. One, I just wanted to kind of like forecast the rest of our time. I
Yeah.
think I think it would be great to, if you'd be willing to come back maybe in a few months to talk specifically about the UXR jobs you've had and that kind of the path after the first getting into UXR. But I feel like really sticking with like the introduction to UXR right now would be really great. Um, I also just remembering that we have like a hard deadline to end, and I know we're gonna want a couple
Yeah.
minutes to wrap things up. So let's just focus this time on the transition to UXR, and then maybe we can cover a little bit about that first job, and then I do have some questions which I'll start now and do some later. But for the
Yeah.
folks who
Good.
are listening, I um I know what UXR is probably mostly because we've had conversations about it. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
So could you let everyone know just what is like the quick and dirty definition of UXR and maybe some examples about how like what it is in industry?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, anything that has a screen, like your phone or the computer, has an interface or some design where all the actions, like what you're supposed to click on to get in there, how you're supposed to buy something online, all of that is considered the user experience of that. So you buy from the minute that you get onto, say, an e-commerce website, like let's say you're going to buy some sporting goods equipment and you go to Dick's Sporting Goods online and you're looking around and you are you make a decision to buy something, and that whole process, that's your user experience. And it's competitive among
Hmm.
e-commerce sites and everybody. If you're trying to choose a bank, like, it matters how the experience of it looks. Everything from your perception of that company just by looking at their design to what it's actually like for you to try to accomplish something on that site. And people don't have very much patience. If a
Yeah.
design is not good, then they're like, well, that's a bad company.
Yeah.
Or if something is hard to do, they're like, well, why should I have to deal with that? If it's hard to buy the thing at Dick's Sporting Goods, I'll just go to a different sporting goods website where it's not going to be hard.
Hmm.
Um, Amazon's a great example of user experience because they were one of the first companies to say, all right, we are actually going to build something, and just on the basis of what people want to,
Hmm.
to use. Um, we're going to make it as easy as possible to buy something
Yeah.
and to have it shipped to them whenever they want it. And they followed that, and they just kept asking people, oh, you don't like this design? Like, what if we did this? And then people gave them feedback, and they improved their website to the point now where it's, it's obviously a successful um, model
Hmm.
for purchasing something online. Uh, User research is part of that product design, and the part of it that it is trying to understand what people's behavior and attitudes are toward the user experience.
Hmm.
So you can look at analytics, um, for instance, website traffic circulation data, and find out, oh, people that were trying to buy something at Dick's Sporting Goods, like, 80% of them left the site when they reached the checkout funnel. That
Right.
would be useful to know for a company. Oh, well, maybe we need to fix something in the checkout funnel that's not working. Or what their attitude is toward it. Oh, every time I go to that site, I kind of I feel like it's messy. Or actually, to use the Amazon example, I always feel like it's pretty chaotic in there. But I mean, it has other virtues, of course.
For sure.
But you're trying to determine how you can make the design of something better. And we're talking about digital products. When we're talking about user experience, we're talking about a digital product and how to, um, make the experience of it better.
Yeah. And so why do you think grad students are, or academics in general, academic researchers are uniquely positioned for the UXR space?
So, what's really required, I think, to be a good researcher or a good user researcher is that you care what people think. You're curious about it and you care. You want to understand what difficulties they had or what they really loved about something, even if it is shopping for a pie or something.
Hmm.
You like people, and you're curious and interested in them and what they think, and you're willing to, you know, ask them about it and learn with an open mind. And that's curiosity is what leads people to graduate school.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's not always the most practical choice, especially, if you're going in the humanities where that output or your goal, like mine, was to be surrounded by ideas, and you love critical thinking. You love, like, if you're a philosophy, I mean, you love drawing distinctions between different things. You love thinking about things and understanding, like, the most precise way of describing something. Um, well, if a business has a problem and they want to know how to solve it, and the problem is, how can we make this design better? You would want someone who is curious what people think, who has the discipline of a researcher so that they aren't led by bias.
Hmm.
They're rigorous and they're disciplined enough to get you the answer, and it's going to be right because they're precise in their thinking. But like, that is a humanities grad student. That is a social science graduate student.
Yeah.
Now, there's some bias in the industry itself, maybe against PhDs, and some of it may be warranted to some extent because possibly they are so passionate about the social or political implications of whatever it is that's going on that it's that they want to reframe the question again and again and again
Sure.
and make it about how it's an important social issue. And that's more accepted in the academy, and it's important work.
Hmm.
But in the business world, they are, and in the tech spaces, while they are concerned with the ethical implications of what they're doing, the person who is asking you to conduct research is following a business strategy and trying to meet business goals. So
Right.
You get to practice empathy with the people you're researching with. You get to be curious, but you're not just talking over a cup of coffee. Like, there's a point. You want to make the design better, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what needs to be the deliverable, I guess. You have
Yeah.
to be doing that. The output of it is not going to be a creative essay on like
Right.
what you found, right?
Yeah. Well, okay, so we've got a couple minutes left. Let's just jump back and maybe do 2 or 3 minutes on that transition from learning what UXR is and then going from professor to UX researcher, and then we can we'll stop there and save the rest for next time. And so that can be
Sounds
a whole
good.
other thing.
Sounds good.
So you learned what UXR is, you're still a professor. What happened next?
Well, I went ahead and did the boot camp, and this timeline that I'm going to describe is pretty much what I've heard from a lot of other people making the transition, because it does take time to translate your experience into the language that the hiring managers and recruiters would really understand. And sorry, I was getting a call there. And that is actually kind of hard because the way that we formulate our CVs is surrounding more how we've maybe been honored for what we've done. There's
Right.
a lot of emphasis on the prestige of where we've been published, or and none of that's really relevant. Even grade point average. I mean, I guess it could matter some places, but what really matters is what is your experience and how closely does it match what we need.
Yeah.
And that's dry and kind of boring because it's like, oh man, what about all the style points that I got when I was doing it, or like, and that's kind of tough. That they're concerned with how good of a match it is, and also what the impact of the work was toward the
Right.
goals that the company had. So if you can say the research that I did improved the design such that there were 30% more users visiting the website, well, that's gonna be part of the business's goal. They get more people on the website. Maybe it's a company that's trying to sell something online. Having more customers, that's better. There's no way of arguing that, right? So if you can put something concrete like that on your resume, even if it's from a different space, like I'm just making up an example here. Because one isn't readily coming to mind from my own resume, but if you were involved, say, in online learning, and you changed a module so that it was more readable, right? Being able to indicate and describe your process to show that what you did was methodical and got the result, that's relevant. If you, for some reason, I don't know why you would necessarily, but maybe you needed to get a grant and you said, I tested this before and students understood it and not as well, and they had this and this and this to say, and then I redesigned it, and then they said it was this, this, and this, and it was much better. Those qualitative remarks that some users made, that would be great evidence of impact. If you can give a number, even better.
Yeah.
80% of people said they loved it. You know, this is what businesses love. I didn't do that very much in my work as a professor.
Sure.
But I did things where I could say I identified the problem. I had a hypothesis. I chose a reasonable method that I followed through on. I learned how to solve the problem. I solved it, and it had impact. And I did things like that. So I just put it in terms as much as I could of this is how my process is really similar to the user research that I would be doing for your company.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great place to stop for today.
Okay.
Just because we're running low on time. So, Greg, I am going to have you back. I think this was a great introduction to UXR for the listeners.
Thanks,
I think there's more to go in the future. I know we talked about it a little bit before, but if you want, for folks who are interested in following along in your journey and maybe want to reach out to you, how would you suggest they do that?
So there's a couple ways. I think LinkedIn, and this is a very important thing leaving academia, is to get a LinkedIn, especially if you're going into the tech space. But I've got a LinkedIn page where I can connect with you. You can look me up and send a request, say you listen to the podcast. I'd be happy to connect on there. I also like to connect with people who are looking for mentoring on ADPList. I also go on there to look for people who could give me advice as a mentor, who have more years of experience than I do, or who are in positions, that I might aspire to. So that's a good place. Both of those, LinkedIn and ADPList.
Absolutely. And I'll have both of those in the description of this episode. So if folks just want to scroll down, I'll have clickable links so that you can find those two things. And that's how I got to know Greg, is through LinkedIn and then the ADPList as well, which I had never used before. I thought that was a really interesting tool. Well, Greg, thank you so much for coming on the show. The final question: what is one thing that grad students need to do before they graduate?
That they need to do?
Or one thing you think they should do?
Yeah. If they aren't already planning or having a plan B of what they might want to go into if their plan A doesn't work out, I think it's worth mapping that out, because it's easy to get disillusioned. I think business changes a lot too, and people find themselves in a job or in an industry even where they're like, this is terrible, I got to get out of here. And in my case, I didn't have a plan B, and it took a while for me to identify something else that would be good for me.
Yeah.
And I feel like if I had maybe thought that through, then I could pivot.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Without like wringing my hands so much.
Absolutely. Well, Greg, thanks you so much for coming on the show. I look forward to continuing to connect with you, and love to have you back sometime to continue this conversation.
Cheers, Matt. Thank you so much for having me on.
All right, thanks. I'll talk to you next time.
All right. Bye.
All right. Folks, thank you for tuning into the Grad School Sucks podcast. I hope you got a lot out of my interview with Gregg today. If you did end up enjoying today's episode, please consider leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Be sure to check out the description of today's episode for links to Gregg's LinkedIn profile, as well as his ADPList page, where folks who are interested in UXR can set up a free mentoring meeting with him. As always, I'm your host, Matt Carlson, and I look forward to bringing you another great episode next week. See y'all next time. What is your real life superpower?
Oh, my real life superpower. This, I think, will go out to really and connect with the neurodivergent folks. Like, I am ADHD and depression, and the superpower I think that goes with, well, especially with ADHD, is hyper focus. I think there are also some ones associated with depression as well, but I think the one that stands out to me the most is probably the ability to hyper focus on things.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Even though I can also find myself hyper focusing on problems, and then there's that side of it. But then there's also hyper focusing on a work problem, and that's great.
Yeah, for sure. So this is kind of related to that. What would you say your spirit animal is?
Oh, my spirit animal?
And why?
My spirit animal. I like to think of my spirit animal as being like an octopus. And maybe there is a connection there, because it's like, it's got 8 different minds. And it's just always all over the place. But they're also really interesting, and they're able to, I guess, be kind of creative in the way they are in the world, like camouflaging themselves, like in, pressure situations, and they're just really cool creatures.
Yeah, that's awesome. So third and final question is, so let's say you had the ability to teleport to anywhere in the world. It could only be one place, though. You could go whenever you wanted, and you could return to wherever you were before. What would that one place be?
Is it place and time?
It's current day. Yeah, just present time. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would want to choose somewhere that I haven't been, especially given the limitations of travel, like the past few years. I think I love being out in the natural world and things that, fill me with wonder. And so I guess, the pyramids, or, some grand things, and locations, I think are really, impressive mountain ranges I'd love to, get a chance to climb in, some really neat places that I haven't been. I'd love to go to Hawaii. Check that out.
Yeah, that's awesome.